This video is going to be about choosing categories for your AASECT CE event. My name is Roz DeChavo. I'm the current Professional Education Steering Committee Chair from 2018 to 2020. So this information will not be good forever. If you're watching this later than that, it may not be good. You might want to check back on the AASECT website. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how to look at the categories broadly. And so if it's primarily information about a subject, it's going to be a core knowledge rather than skills training. So what do I mean by that? Well, if it's primarily just information, even if it's deep information or esoteric information or something that not a lot of people know, it's still going to be considered core knowledge because it's information about sexuality in some way. And so what you're going to do then, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, is choose what it's mainly about for your categories. If it's primarily information on how to use information in your practice as an educator, counselor, or therapist, then it's skills training. Okay, so it's sex therapy training or sex education training or sex counseling training. And again, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to choose what it's mainly about when you're choosing your categories rather than everything. So let's talk about how to do that. Let's give an example. Let's say we have a 3 CE event called Black Women's Experiences in BDSM Spaces. And you know, you look at your information. If it's mainly like, how do Black women experience these things? How might they feel? How might their experience be different than others' experiences in kink spaces? Information about Black women and kink in general. That sounds a lot like a core knowledge training. It doesn't really sound like how to apply something. And so we would put it under sociocultural influences or diversity of sexual expression. Now, if it is more about how to apply something, or if there's a significant section of that that's about how to apply this knowledge to your current practice as an educator, counselor, or therapist, that's fine. You would do sort of maybe 2 categories there, or 3. You might do sociocultural influences and diversity of sexual expression. And then let's say you spend a good hour or even a half an hour on how to talk to Black women about how kink might be different for them and how they might, it might basically normalizing their experiences in kink spaces. Well, that might be skills training. So that might be, so how do you do this? Again, that might be skills training for therapists or educators or counselors. So, but if you look at something like assessing kink versus abuse for Black women, let's say, then that is more about skills training. It's about how to take that information and apply it to what you do as a professional, right? So now you're talking sex therapy training, sex educator training, or sex counseling training. So for sex therapists, they might be looking at something like the theory and methods of sex therapy area of skills training, or the theory and methods of sex-related assessment. Again, assessing kink versus abuse is right there in the title. So it's possible that that would be a good place to put that. For sex educators and sex counselors, it might be something like working with specific populations, but also there might be a significant amount of core information in there about kink versus abuse. And in that case, we might want to put it under something like sexual coercion. So again, it seems to me that this would definitely be under the skills training. But again, if you can put some of it under core knowledge, it's just that if you look at how it's primarily categorized, that's what you want to do. So the guidelines are things like less is more, right? If you're not going to primarily cover a specific category for a significant period, don't list it under that category. So for instance, a lot of people like to throw ethics in there, but really, if you're not talking about ethics as a concept, please don't put ethics as a category because, just talking about best practices, for instance, yeah, that has a lot to do with ethics, but unless you're specifically discussing how to be ethical as a therapist or a counselor or an educator, it probably doesn't belong in the ethics category. You might want to think about it like at least a half an hour, maybe. That might be a good guideline. And again, not to rigidly stick to that, but essentially, keep it in your head that if you're not spending a lot of time talking about ethics specifically, don't put it under ethics. And the same thing for professional communication skills. If you just happen to mention that somebody might need a referral, that's not really enough to say that you're covering the category of professional education skills. So again, somebody is not going to be able to really use that toward initial certification if you really didn't talk about professional communication skills in a general way. If you don't have a learning objective that deals with teaching people how to do something, it should probably be core knowledge. And again, thinking about your learning objectives period, if you're wondering what categories you should be using, go back to your learning objectives and look at exactly what those people are going to be walking out with. If people are going to be walking out with a skill like how to assess kink versus abuse in Black women, well, then that sounds a lot like skills training. If they're going to be walking out with a learning objective like how to discern kink from abuse, that could be skills training, could be core knowledge in sexual coercion. So again, don't throw in the kitchen sink with these categories. Just try and discern a bit which does it more mainly belong in, and then choose maybe 2 or 3 categories. If it's a longer training, no problem, put it in more. But in general, you shouldn't have sort of 6 different categories for a 2 or 3 hour training. It's unrealistic or unlikely that it's going to actually fit into all of those. Okay, so last thoughts. More is not better. More is just confusing. Less is definitely more when it comes to this. And in order to do that, just stick with the main themes of your presentation. Check your learning objectives when you're marking the categories. If there's no learning objective that addresses the category that you're trying to mark, chances are it doesn't belong there. And if you must, at the end of all this, if you're still confused and you really can't figure out where they belong, please contact us at ce@asect.org. Thanks. Hope this was helpful.